Leading this session is Abe Wheeler. Abe grew up in Oregon and has always loved the outdoors. He is currently the state O&C Forester for the Bureau of Land Management in Oregon. He built his career around the people side of forestry and has focused on collaborating with the public to develop innovative forestry techniques that span the gap between timber production and ecological conservation. His origins are in the rural part of Oregon, but his forestry career has led him to a tall office building in Portland, so he is a forester in the city. With that, Abe and the Foresters in the City panel really understand that people is at the center of forestry. Human actions impact health, abundance, and conditions of the forest ecosystems, and likewise, conditions in the forest directly impact human quality of life, even our health and well-being. Please help me in welcoming Abe and his panel.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I have the honor and privilege today to help moderate this Foresters in the City panel. And accompanying me here are three forestry professionals, urban forestry professionals. And I'll start out with a little bit of an introduction, and then one by one, I'll allow them to fill in some of the blanks, talk about what they do and why it matters and all that kind of thing. So first, I'll introduce Michael R. Am I saying that right? R.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Pirate sound.
Yeah, there we go. Michael is leading the forestry program at the West Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District. And he grew up in Denver, Colorado, Cincinnati, Ohio, even lived a few years in Marietta, Georgia. Then he went and studied wildlife management at Ohio State University. Has a background in education of youth, working with children from a diverse ethnic, racial, and economic backgrounds. Really kind of got excited about teaching people about the outdoors. And then that excitement led to a degree at Oregon State University, a master's degree in natural resource education and extension at the College of Forestry there. So he's been working with family woodland owners and farmers for 15 years. So, Michael, would like to hear a little bit more from you on what you do and why it matters.
Sure. Yeah, so when I started off going to the Ohio State University for my degree, I chose it largely because I thought I would go to vet school one day, which is a little bit of a theme that came up in the last panel too, veterinary school. But I was a little bit, I guess, of a kind of like a tree planted on the wrong site there, where I was surviving, but I wasn't really thriving in those classes, I'd say. And eventually switched over to more of a natural resources focus, where I really felt at home, and that was really great. And so after school, I ended up getting into doing education with youth in kind of an outdoor school sort of a setting, and just really, really loved doing education and that kind of work. So yeah, that brought me out here to OSU, where I started a master's degree focusing on natural resources education. And I really wasn't sure what I would focus on for a thesis project at first, but in one of my first courses I took was Private Forests in Society was the name of it, and John Bliss was the teacher. And I immediately went into my major professor at Jensen shortly after a few sessions of that and said, I think that this is really what I want to focus on. I really think that these stories of people who own woodlands, and I think this is just really amazing. And there's a lot of great stories of people owning them for generations and this deep connection to the land. So with the West Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District, I work just kind of in the West Hills of Portland, just north of Forest Park, and a little bit west of it's about 20,000 acres of forest, and 15,000 acres of that's owned by small woodland owners. And that could be 2 or 3 acres of their ownership, or they might own 180 acres or something like that. And a lot of these landowners are kind of newer to it. They, there's some that have been there a really long time, but some are just kind of newer owners, and they're really just learning how to manage land for the first time. And it's really fun to help them along with setting up some objectives and thinking about how to achieve some great things out there. When I work with these folks, you might think that they would be like really inclined to not cut trees or something, being this close to Portland, but they're actually really interested in active management. And I think that some of them will in the future be able to harvest some merchantable timber products for sure. But knowing that a lot of them won't be able to do that very easy because access issues are difficult, they're smaller ownerships, there may not be a lot of wood there. I think they're really important because they have all kinds of wildlife habitat. And because we do have a 5,000-acre city park, which is Forest Park here in the West Hills of Portland, it's great to work with these folks that are that connectivity corridor that brings these wildlife, and we just want to encourage good forest health, hopefully not too many invasive species all the way out there to the coast range.
All right. Can we please give a warm applause here for Michael? Thanks for joining us on this panel. And so next we have Angie DeSalvo. She manages the Outreach and Science Group for Portland Parks and Recreation Urban Forestry. Now, she grew up in Ohio's forest as her playground. Went to graduate school, and I'm seeing a pretty good list of degrees here. Master's in Forestry and Education in Counseling, and Bachelor's in Environmental Science from Wright State University. The other two from Northern Arizona University, right? Mm-hmm. Then she moved to the big city of Portland, and for a while was working at the World Forestry Institute, right?
Yes, right here.
And let's see, so, I mean, you can find her in a normal week conducting tree inventories, teaching tree care, talking to communities about trees, plotting against invasive pests, planning, and of course, sitting in a lot of meetings, right? Outside of work, you might find her tending her garden, harvesting fruit, or inventing nature crafts with her kids. So, Angie, I'd like to hear a little bit more from you about your background and then what you do and why it's important.
Sure, great. So happy to be here. So Portland Parks and Rec, we manage or maintain or regulate or touch somehow most of the trees here in the city. And I have the pleasure of keeping check on the pulse of the health of our city's forest. So that means monitoring and measuring and making long-term plans for our city's forest, and then really communicating those findings to our various stakeholders. And so I have a very dynamic and fun job that I think is very different than some of my colleagues here on the panel. And thinking about why it's important or why it's relevant. So I think it's important to talk about the difference between urban forestry and traditional forestry. So in urban forestry, our products that we are managing for are not your lumber or your chips. Our trees are considered essential infrastructure that are providing a vast array of benefits for all of our city's residents. And we're not just talking about ecosystem benefits, not just clean air and clean water, but community benefits, people benefits. So health, whether it's mental or physical, reduced crime rates, better property values, the list just goes on. And so we're really looking at trees in a very different way than the panel, say, who was right before us. Now, 80% of our population lives in urban areas. And so your first interaction with nature is generally with the trees that may be right outside your door. And so if we want to help people connect better to our forests that are in natural areas, I think we need to start right at home. Someone today told me our urban forests are gateway forests, and I really love that term. But they're right there, they're right outside, and so I think that's pretty relevant.
It definitely is.
Yep.
Thanks, Angie. And so please give her a round of applause again. All right, and down there on the end we have Kira McCarthy, who is a consulting arborist with Arbor Surveys and Associates in Bend, Oregon, and education coordinator for Pacific Northwest chapter of the International Society of Arboriculture. Now, Kira grew up in Ballyhooly, County Cork, Ireland. Please tell me I said that right.
You did?
I did, hey. I love it. Yeah. So she says, surrounded by broadleaf climbing frames and state forests of Sitka spruce. So what a great place to grow up, I imagine. She gained a chemistry diploma first, and then Kira decided to listen to herself. And she embarked on an agroforestry degree in North Wales in the UK, and an exchange year at the Oregon State University College of University there in Corvallis. She was, while working in the Forestry Commission, Kira was drawn towards arboriculture and urban forestry, a career that's allowed her to work in the UK, Ireland, Australia, and now here in the Pacific Northwest. And to Kira, the common thread, I think, around all these different countries is really about education. In Bend, her work has been as a consultant to help residents, commercial entities, and agencies to see trees as green infrastructure and a valuable resource. Then it's about caring for the urban canopy. When not working, Kira enjoys all Bend, Oregon has to offer, but has yet to learn how to ski. And I pointed this out before where she wrote a bunch of exclamation points behind ski, and I was like, ooh, this means she really is excited about it. We just need to add snow to this, right? And
That's
then you're
true.
ready to go.
That is true.
Okay, so...
Yeah, because I think growing up, we thought we were skiing on frosty fields and things like that, because we never got snow. But thanks for the introduction, Michael. Yeah, I started out in chemistry after I left high school, after our leaving cert, which is the exams in high school in Ireland. And I was studying that, and then I ended up working in an agricultural lab, and I was testing soil for NP and K for farmland. And I really realized, I want to be the person out there digging up that soil, talking to people, consulting, and I just wasn't suited to being in a lab environment. So I started looking at forestry, and I didn't realize it was an actual option to study at all. I grew up where I was surrounded by woodland, but all we heard was like, oh, there's no jobs in forestry, and industry had gone. But the more I researched it, I realized there's so much more to forestry. It'll suit all different personalities or skill sets. And so off I went to study agroforestry, and never looked back. So I ended up in urban forestry, and I think all of the skills and learning all along the way, they've all come together, and I feel pretty at home in the career, actually. So, and now I'm working as a consulting arborist over in Bend, on the east side of the Cascades, and my days involve tree risk assessments, tree appraisals, which is putting dollar value on trees in the urban environment, tree management plans, so that's helping homeowners or homeowner associations to manage tree populations. And I also conduct a lot of tree inventories, which is very important information that we gather out in the field in order to make some of those decisions at a city level or a neighborhood association level, and some of the stuff that Angie has been talking about there. And yeah, it's important to get this information to enhance the benefits that trees offer in the urban environment. So,
all right,
yeah.
Please help me welcome
Yeah.
Kira in the classroom. All right. So we have a handful of questions prepared, and I already got a couple in my pocket that we've collected from the audience. So I'll start. One of the things we've talked about is that forestry in the city, really at the center of forestry are the people. And I imagine in your guys' jobs, you've had, met some interesting people, had some interesting experiences. So the first question is, can you tell us a story about an interesting day, an interesting experience or project, and the interesting people that you've met or engaged with in your job? Maybe we'll start with you, Angie, on this question.
Sure. So I feel like my day is often spent going back and forth between the many different audiences, from the disgruntled property owner to city council to park workers to just a wide variety of audiences. And one of the things that we're currently working on in parks is our distribution problem with trees. And when we look at the city of Portland, if you live west of the Willamette River, you have about 56% canopy cover. If you live on the east side, you have about 21% canopy cover. So all those great benefits that we just talked about aren't really sitting there where most of our population lives. And when we drill down even further, we see we have the lowest amounts of canopy where we have our most vulnerable communities, our low-income communities, communities of color, immigrants, refugees, and we have a big challenge. And by the way, that 21% is lower than both New York City and Los Angeles, their canopy cover. Wow. So we think of Portland as so green, but we still have a lot of work to do. And so we've taken a pause this year to really start to think about how can have a better strategy for getting trees in the ground so that we can bring them equitably to all Portlanders. And part of that is talking with communities. So of course we talk with all the other bureaus, people who plant the trees, all of our partners, but I've had the great opportunity to do a series of focus groups with community leaders. And so we've sat down with the Slavic community, the Vietnamese community, the Latino community, recent Bhutanese immigrants, and recent African immigrants to talk about trees. So are trees important to you? Are they a priority for you? Economically, like, how does this impact you? What are barriers to getting trees in the ground? How can we support your communities? And really just having a strong dialogue with community members. And that has been one of the most interesting and great parts of my position that I never thought I would be doing when I went to forestry school. Cross-cultural communication is not really something that they teach next to forest economics, but it's come in handy. And having worked at the World Forestry Center, where in my previous job I worked with our international fellows, and I feel like I gained a whole lot of skills working with folks from all over the world, but I still have a lot to learn. And as city civil servants, one of the most important things we need to do is to learn to sit back and listen and really understand what our communities are telling us.
Wow, that's really interesting. And
Yeah.
I had a rural, more of a rural background, and for the last 2 years, I've been immersed in the Portland city environment, and really struck by the amount of diversity. People from all over the world, and lots of different languages, and all kinds of ideas. And you're facing that. In your day-to-day job, collecting input from those different stakeholders. Yeah. That's really got to be interesting. So, Michael, same question to you. Interesting experiences, interesting day, interesting people, stories to tell on that.
Yeah, so I love a big part about my job is the diversity of people I run across. And sometimes they may just be woodland owners, but I can have a meeting one day with someone who's got really strong objectives around doing wildlife habitat, and just kind of have to put on this wildlife biologist kind of a hat. And the next day just be talking about all the nuts and bolts of getting rid of that darn ivy that's growing all over the trees around here. So there's some little bit of diversity in that, and I love changing gears around that. But then, there's often I may spend the next day then having to helping to show a crew around a site that's going to treat some of this ivy. And I talked to a lot of different diverse folks that come out and are doing a lot of that work. And then at the district, we're also really big into partnerships and work with a lot of really creative people that have such better solutions to different issues than maybe I have. And so love doing the partnerships with other groups around town here as well. And we're really interested in increased work on diversity, equity, and inclusion here in Portland. And so I could finish with the Friday where I'm in a meeting talking to a bunch of people with a lot of representatives from different groups of color, and trying to talk about how do we get more of these people to come and want to have forestry careers and help us out with this kind of work. So very fun.
All right, that sounds like it. What about you, Kira? It sounds like you have even international experiences too that complement what you're doing there in Bend.
Yeah,
curious to hear your perspective.
Michael, I think the wearing different hats is a thing an urban forester does a lot of. So my days can comprise of working with different residents, helping them to get along with their trees, and helping them to actually manage their properties. In Bend, there are a lot of new people, myself included, that have moved there, and it's such a different environment, like being up in the high desert, and teaching people what plants will grow, what trees will grow, what kind of challenges you will have, and helping the urban forests in that way, and in that educating. So I think one of the main themes that I have is constant education, whether you're talking to one property owner, a board of a homeowners association, you're in a multidisciplinary team with engineers, architects, planners, and you're talking trees. But one of the really exciting things I get to do as I'm on the board of Oregon Community Trees, and we provide education and look at like geographic diversity. Especially over in the eastern side, we try and get around to various different cities and teach some of the practical skills needed to manage trees in the urban environment. So that'll be formative tree pruning, tree protection during construction, tree selection and planting. And that'll be to homeowners, and it's often to other people in the profession as well, or people who might want to get into arboriculture or urban forestry. I work with various different groups to try and encourage these practical skills. And sometimes it's actually a gateway into a new career for somebody. So we work with like corrections facilities, and Heart of Oregon is one where it's teenagers working in natural resources, and Girl Scouts as well. So that's been a lot of fun, like getting people climbing trees and actually, seeing it as a career, which I kind of wish I had that a little bit younger, but I'm glad to have found it at the end. But it's always a lot of fun, and it's really great when you meet somebody a couple of years later and they're like, yeah, I know, I'm working in Portland with an urban, a tree service, and I love it. And or you've you just have that connection with somebody, and you hear back something you may have said to them as well. So it's really rewarding that way. So it's varied as well. So yeah.
Right. Sounds like it.
Yeah.
So with any job, we have highs and lows, right? There's really great days. There's really bad days. There's ups and downs. I'm curious, because we're trying to, understand more about what you do and why. What are these kinds of highs and lows? Challenges, opportunities, successes, those kinds of things. And maybe we'll just have you continue, Kira.
Sure.
And talk about that a little bit.
So I guess one of the highs in my time working in urban forestry was fairly early on, and I was there was a new road being constructed in Cork City, and a tree that was slated for removal. It was a beautiful oak tree, and I took a look at some of the plans and realized, I think we can keep this tree. I mean, we can have the tree protection zone around this and educate the construction people on what needs to be done on site, and spoke to the engineers, and we managed to do this. And I was kind of shocked. I'm like, oh, what I said actually happened, and the tree is still there. So when I go back to visit my parents, and it's actually on the road near the airport, so every time I go past, I'm like, it's still there and it's looking great. That's fantastic. So it's one of those, it's really great to have had that I spoke up and I advocated for this and realized it can happen. And I think the learning I had from that was part of the communication that's involved. So if you're talking to engineers or landscape architects or architects, what I realized is sometimes it needs to be on the drawings, what you're trying to communicate. It's all about knowing your audience. So it's getting tree protection measures onto plans right at the beginning, right at the design phase, or when it's being planned, so that out on site, whoever's looking at this actually has the information. The other way then is if I'm working with planners, and I hope I'm not stereotyping too much, but this is my experience. Planners, it's like the detailed technical writing, a lot of it in reports as opposed to drawings. So it's kind of learning, who am I talking to, how do I present the information. So it was a great learning, a real high. A low was the flip side of that, where a tree wasn't retained, and it could have been, and I question myself still, going, did I have the communication tools at the time to try and convey the message here? Did I speak up in time? So it's good learning to keep those experiences behind me as motivation in what I do every day. So
all right.
Yeah,
That's great. How about you, Michael?
So as far as highs and lows, I think, so through some of my work, I get to help write management plans with landowners for things they're going to be doing over the next several years. And then I also get to kind of sit back and watch their projects develop over a few years. So definitely some of the highs are seeing some of these projects get finished and actually kind of come out the way you expected them to. And it doesn't always work that way, but we have a decent batting average, I guess. So it's really fun to just see these things kind of come towards a conclusion. a good project's never done. You got to maintain it forever too. But so that's really fun. But then some of the lows that we're kind of asked about too, I think, is with this work being so heavy in communication is that sometimes it does kind of break down. Your communication sort of falls apart with someone, and that can be really frustrating. And I think as much as we love people, we also have these natural resources backgrounds where we have a vision for the land, like it's obvious this should happen or something, and you're trying to communicate that, and the landowner or the person just doesn't really hear you. But with that, I think what's really important is there's probably something I'm not hearing from them that puts me in that position where I'm not understanding, and I think that sometimes that can be tough.
Yeah.
And your perspective, Andy?
Yeah, so the highs, the people are great, and the lows, the people are really a pain sometimes. Technically we've got it all figured out. The trees are really the easy part, but again, trees fine, people a little bit challenging. As a forester, one of the first things you learn and the perspective you take is to look at the long-term perspective. To really think big picture and long-term. And I think as a society, we are so instant gratification. And it is really hard for me to do all that. So for example, talking about tree retention, someone you might have, say, a 200-year-old Oregon white oak. And, they want to put a garage in. I don't want to move it a couple feet, That's a decision that can't be undone or grown back very quickly. And for as much as Portlanders love trees, we really like them best in other people's spaces. So, because they do take effort. You have to plant and you have to maintain, and they drop leaves and they're messy, and all of these things. So I am going to work on, we talked about YIMBYism, yes, in my backyard. So I am going to go for that this year as my nugget that I'm going to take away. And that would be a frustration. If we could all move towards saying yes to looking at the long-term perspective and saying yes.
Interesting. So I'm going to transition just a little bit back to kind of education. A question about education. You guys all have pretty well-rounded educational backgrounds that look like they've set you up pretty well for your jobs. But the question is more about what did you learn in school that has proven to be the most valuable? And then the flip side of that being, what do you wish you had learned sooner, right? That you've learned through your experiences, but you sure wish you had come right out of college with it in hand. And let's start with you again, Kira.
Sure. Well, I guess the one thing they try and teach you in school is to listen. And it's, something I've developed more through my career is actually listening to other people's points of view. I think you come out and you think, oh, right, I know it all, but it's actually about that communication, and it's two-way, and understanding other people's points of views. And definitely that communication factor beyond that and using the different tools you have. And it's hard to start off having everything. I think a lot of what we do is developed through experience. So, be it hands-on practical experience in whatever job you're doing, and understanding it and then moving on. I don't think it's, I think that's part of being human. It's constantly learning. Yeah. And, eventually getting to the point where you're educating other people and advocating for whatever it is. I mean, whatever you're passionate about, and being comfortable in that. And it's an important thing to do, because there's people who may not or can't, so you have to get out there and do that. And I really do think a lot of that comes from experience, and just, that's the next step to take. So I think life is constant learning. So.
And then the nice part about forestry, I think, is that there's room for a wide variety of skill sets. So once you get the basics, we need folks with, maybe it be the chemistry background or whatever it may be. And as an example, as I was going through school, I started out in environmental science, and it was too general. I wanted to do something more practical. I also liked people. I ended up getting a degree in counseling, which group therapy practice actually prepared me quite well for some of the conversations that happen on a regular basis. And so, I would echo communication. And I don't think I necessarily walked away with the full skill set that I needed, but I had a passion to keep learning. And our professional organizations have really taught me a lot and provided a lot in terms of models and mentorships. And I had the great privilege of knowing Bill Hagenstein when he was here and hearing his history lessons at every Portland SAF chapter meeting when he would speak to his experience over the decades. And with that long-term perspective, he was a strong communicator. And I think it just really modeled for me some of the lessons that have helped me to be successful.
Interesting. What about you, Michael?
So when I came back for graduate school, one thing I tried to focus on was a lot of the kind of education and communication sort of work that would be part of natural resources. And I think that it was really helpful to me because I feel like I kind of came out of school maybe almost better at the communication than I was really at the forestry stuff for a while. And thanks to a lot of great mentors and folks I've worked with, I've probably built up those skills a little bit better over time, although I got a lot of it in school too. But I think that just building more and more of that conflict resolution, communication, things like that into school, into the education for us as professionals would be really good. And I think some of what I've learned along those lines through my career so far are things I would have loved to go back 7 years to when I started this job anyway, and I already had known all that somehow.
Yeah.
Well, I'll echo. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think with forestry too, you can't discount the need for on-the-ground experience. And so you're not going to walk out of school knowing everything. You've just got to get out there and get your hands dirty. And we were kind of joking about the age cutoff for the young emerging foresters. And that really, it takes a couple years to get out there and to really get it all figured out. So.
I'd add, don't be afraid to ask questions as well. Like when you're around other professionals in the community. I mean, people love to give information to try and help you in your career, and whether that's through professional organizations or events like today, it's really good to talk to other people and give information, receive information, all of that kind of thing. But don't be afraid to ask questions. I think early on, I was a bit reluctant to ask those questions. And,
Yeah, and I was just going to echo what I had heard from the other panel members, about, when I, when I got out of school, it was like, okay, I need to know every tree, and I need to know every plant, and I need to know the fungi and the interactions between all of them. I need to know the ecology and like all the sciencey stuff, all the real geeky kind of sciencey stuff. I want to be expert on all this stuff because I want to be in the woods. And then I realized it didn't take long, how important communication and group dynamics and all that kind of stuff was. So if I were to change one thing with my schooling, it probably would have been more of an emphasis on that. Although you certainly do get a lot of that through experience, don't you? Yeah. So we have a handful of questions here, but I'm going to ask one more canned one before I get to the audience questions. So some say that forestry is an antiquated profession. Like as time goes on, forestry becomes less and less relevant to contemporary society. And so why is it still relevant? And how do you see the profession evolving into the future? And I'll go with you. Go ahead, Michael. Yeah.
Well, forestry won't really die until all the forests do, I guess. So we have...
That's great.
We'll always have a need for forestry. We just may need to change techniques based on public perception or based on what's feasible out there. What's the forest able to provide? So I think that even though we might hear of some older practices that happened out there in the woods that we think are antiquated now or don't fit different scenarios, but I think we just constantly have to adapt. I think that's why it's great to to listen to the young people's crazy ideas like we are today, I guess, in some ways. But I mean, there's been a lot of adaptation in forestry, and I've really enjoyed learning from that. And I think that that it will continue to evolve for sure.
Right, thank you.
So yeah, we'll continue learning, try new techniques. But one thing that we could use some help with, I think, is diversifying the folks that enter forestry. So most folks, again, don't know that forestry is an option. They don't know what it is. They don't know why that might be something interesting or relevant to them. And they might not see folks who look like them working in that field. And so I think just diversifying our workforce is only going to do positive things for increasing the professionalism and the skill base and the knowledge in the profession. And I think that's always been a challenge, and it'll continue to be, but let's get out there and recruit some new foresters.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think with all of the different other professions that we work with, I mean, mostly an urban forester or a consulting arborist is part of a multidisciplinary team. So we are dealing with architects, landscape architects, planners, engineers, different departments and municipalities. So it is a very important role. I just see more of it in the future. I mean, we're talking about urban forests, we're talking about a green resource that cools cities down, mitigates stormwater. We have a lot of documented evidence on the health benefits of forests. And we're looking at like increased urbanization, increased high density living. So what we're trying to do is manage trees in the urban environment and keep their stress levels at a minimum, because it's not a natural environment for a tree. And we're trying to mitigate against like pest and disease infestation because a tree is stressed. So if we don't do that, obviously we're going to be in a major situation, especially now with climate change and all of that. So I do think it's a very relevant profession, and I think I would encourage more people into the industry. So.
That's a good outlook. I like that.
Was it?
Yeah, I think so. So a couple audience questions here, and we've got a few minutes left. So I'm sure we won't get to all of them, but I'll call these out, and then whoever wants to answer it first is totally cool. So do you have any thoughts or ideas about creating better wood utilization policies from urban tree removals? Almost seems like a little buzzer. Anyone?
There is some recent research. I think it's Clackamas County have done a lot of research on that, and it is something being looked into. Actually, getting products from urban lumber with mobile sawmills, and we have some beautiful wood or different species growing in cities, and it's highly sought after by furniture makers and that kind of area. But that's kind of there is an opportunity there for sure, and it's definitely being seriously looked into. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, and whoever wrote that question, if we didn't answer the angle you were looking for, there will be time at the break.
Yeah.
You can talk to
How
one of
about
us.
cross-laminate timber?
Definitely, yeah. Okay, so next question. Can anyone talk about Pacific Northwest hardwoods, specifically Oregon white oak, red alder, big leaf maple? Are people planting hardwood trees and sustainably managing these forests?
I could take a stab.
Okay.
So definitely there are different small woodland owners that you come across that do have patches of red alder, or they have patches of big leaf maple, and it's really a matter of objectives. A lot of these landowners love that. They really like to walk through it and just enjoy that, and so they are trying to maintain it, and those are systems that we can do some work thinning those forests to make them healthier and things like that. Red alder can have economic returns, so we see a lot more foresters out there, I think, encouraging people, don't get rid of your alder for Douglas fir, keep growing this could be a good thing, or and that kind of deal. And then there's a lot of conservation going on out there with Oregon white oak. My organization's a big advocate of that. It's a kind of a vanishing species a bit. And so on the next panel, there will be some Oregon white oak owners that can speak as well. But we're starting to get more science out there about how to best grow these systems too, I think, as there's increasing interest in it.
Yeah, and then I just have one thing to add: hardwoods, because we're more managing in the wildlands, but the hardwood component can be very important for a wildlife species. So that you may be managing this piece of forest, but not for the timber or the lumber that would come out of it, but maybe purely for the habitat objectives. So I think this is going to be a question for you, Angie. Let's see, so there's a little bit of a lead-in. I won't read the whole thing, but the idea that you talked about canopy cover on the east side versus the west side, and that it would be an honorable goal to increase canopy cover on the east side and kind of make this more equitable. But along with increased canopy cover comes increased moisture in the air, which can lead to increased maybe mold and mildew, is what they're saying. And so how do these human health factors get considered while planning for increasing tree canopy cover in cities?
Interesting. We do get more, people are asking more questions now about, are trees good? I hear about VOCs, I hear about allergies, I hear about all of these other challenges, all these male clones you're out there planting, there's pollen everywhere. This is having a negative impact. I don't know that I can speak very specifically to mold or mildew, but the mantra that we say is do no harm. Whatever action it is that we're out there to do, in the end, the balance is that we don't want to harm communities. I'd say probably more important is the consideration that trees cost money to maintain, and that when you increase canopy cover or you put a tree in someone's yard or in their front planting strip, they're going to be required to maintain it, and that may have some financial impact on them. And so considering those factors, I think, is important, and what we talked about earlier, informed decision making. So opportunity to say yes or no, but looking big picture, thinking about the overall benefits, and do they outweigh some of those potential risks? And I think that they do.
Yeah, I would just add on to that. One thing is that we know that trees in the city can do a lot to kind of abate stormwater somewhat too, by capturing a lot of it before it hits the ground. And I know at my house, the biggest moisture concern would be it coming into the crawl space and that kind of thing. So, having trees that help with that are really important. And we definitely see different studies coming out now, like they're saying better canopy in your front yard may contribute to less frequency of low birth weights in children, and just all kinds of different stuff that's really human health related. So I think that often we think of really positive impacts with human health canopy.
Yeah, and that's why I was a little bit, I guess I hadn't encountered this kind of a question before. I've seen a lot of fresh research coming out about, when there's more forest, then the human health and well-being is higher, statistically higher.
Well, and a valid question that goes back to listening to your audience and finding out what the real concerns are, and looking into it and addressing it and finding out what the science says.
All right. Sounds like we may have some follow-up questions for that in the break, but we're just out of time, so we'll have to hold on to the rest of these questions.
Great. Can we have a round of applause?